Greetings, my name is Karl Lampkin. I'm currently enrolled in Liberty University in the class Organizational Communication Theory and Practice. I'm tasked with week 6, presentation of chapter 15, conflict and negotiation within organizations. Starting with the nature of conflict within organization is just as personal, business, or interpersonal, because conflict is inevitable. It's something that's going to happen. We have to learn how to successfully manage conflict. We have to keep in mind that conflict, too much or too little conflict, is dysfunctional. However, conflict has its benefits. Conflict is common within organizations. The authors define conflict as a process resulting in the perceptions of two parties that they are working in opposition to each other in ways that result in feelings of discomfort and or animosity. Through the years, there have been many social scientists that have come define conflict in various ways. Nonetheless, there are several words that interchange between many of the definitions by those social scientists. Such definitions are differences in opposition, where it kind of defines conflict in a negative way. However, we may have similar goals, may have different routes to get to our goals, and we may have to go through conflict to get there. And conflict is productive, it's not just dysfunctional. First, conflict is a process, it's not a singular event. It evolves over time and draws upon previous events. Furthermore, the parties that actually engage in conflict have to agree that there is a conflict. If you have an observer that sees participants undergoing what may appear to be a conflict, it may just be a dialogue, because the participants in the conflict have to agree that there is a conflict. Finally, there has to be discomfort or animosity occurs in order for there to be a conflict. An example would be a sporting event between the work group or friends. There's one goal, and that goal is victory. Each goal is victory, but they have to go through each other to obtain that victory. So therefore, they produce healthy competition, and basically that's conflict. The nature of conflict within organization, a moderate degree of optimal level of focused conflict. The key word is the focused conflict, which promotes the benefits of conflict, such as new ideas, promote healthy competition, energize behavior, motivation, creativity, innovation, and initiative, which can all result in higher performance. Now, the absence of conflict can lead to apathy and lethargically. Either too much or too little conflict, as I mentioned, can be dysfunctional within an organization. Too little conflict, which means not challenging employees or managers or executives, could lead to staleness within an organization. There are common forms and causes of conflict. There's task conflict, process, relationship, and legal conflict. Task conflict refers to conflict regarding the goals and content of the work. Managers working within an organization or corporation, but they have different plans. One, manager A has a goal of maximizing corporate profits. Manager B wants to invest in social programs and give back to promote the company in a positive way. Then there's the process conflict. It occurs when parties agree on goals and contents of the work, but they disagree on how to achieve those goals. Example of social programs: one manager wants to share the company's profits with society. Executive or manager B wants to invest in a particular social program, such as Habitat for Humanities. Both wants to invest in social programs, but they have different ways of doing it. Then there's the relationship conflict. Occurs when the parties have interpersonal issues. A perfect example, you have one individual within in a work group that has very conservative religious views. Then there's another individual within a work group that uses off-color humor and telling his jokes, boasts about his riotous lifestyle. That's a conflict of confrontation in the making. Then there's the legal conflict, which may arise when there are differences in perceptions between organizations. Moving forward, there are causes of conflict. There's the interpersonal, intergroup, and a conflict between organizations and environment. Interpersonal conflict is a frequent source of interpersonal with an organization, is what many people call a personality clash. The intergroup connect between two or more organizational groups and is also quite common. Then there's the conflict between organizations and environment. Conflict that arises when one organization and another is called in an inter-organizational conflict. Then, and just in continuum, there's the task interdependence, which can result in conflict across any of the levels of noted previously. There are three major forms of task interdependence, which is the pull, sequential, and reciprocal. The pull interdependence represents the lowest level of interdependence and therefore results in the least amount of conflict. A perfect example is there's a franchise, but there are different groups or stores throughout states in the nation. All of them benefit from some of the same sources, but there's little or no interaction in between them. Therefore, there's pull interdependence. Then there's the sequential interdependence, which is the output of one unit becomes the input of another. Basically, something going from one place to another. The text uses a great example. Speaking of Nissan Automotive, there are different sites throughout the nation or within the state where groups make one part or another, and they all transport those parts to one central location to assemble the whole automobile. Then there's a reciprocal interdependence, which has the highest potential for conflict. This is when activities flow both ways between a group. Example of a hotel chain, you have an individual that's a consumer, he calls in to reserve a room. Then you have housekeeping, and you have so many independent and dependent variables that coincide of making that consumer a satisfied customer. There could be a breakdown in either group from A to D or C or B. So each group has to work together simultaneously to achieve a common goal, which is customer satisfaction. Then there's the reactions of conflict. Whenever conflicts occur between groups or organization, it is really the people who are in conflict because they're representatives of a group. And because organizations are composed of people, you have the habits of people, you have the strengths and weaknesses of people. And in reactions to conflict, you have goal compatibility, avoidance, accommodation, competition, collaboration, compromise. Okay, and goal compatibility is the extent to which goals can be achieved simultaneously. Avoidance occurs when the interaction is relatively unimportant to either party's goal or incompatible. Accommodation occurs when the goals are compatible but the interactions are not considered important to overall goal attainment. And competition occurs when the goals are incompatible and interactions are important to each party's meeting its goals. Then collaboration and compromise are somewhat similar in nature but have variances that make some difference. And the difference within compromise collaboration is goal attainment, and the goals are neither completely compatible or nor completely incompatible. Within reactions to conflict, they're somewhat of an offset where you have temperament. You can have individuals that are strong introverts or extroverts that they're mainly house certain reactions, and they use that one reaction to all sources of conflict when one has to learn emotional intelligence to be able to use each reaction interchangeably, basically using the right reaction for the right process. And within managing conflict, managers must know when to stimulate conflict and when to resolve it if they are to avoid potential disruptive effects. And there are several ways to stimulate and resolve conflict. There's the conflict stimulation, conflict resolution, and subordinate goal. The conflict stimulation basically moves with the benefits of conflict. And the conflict resolution is a managed effort to reduce or eliminate harmful conflict. As I mentioned, too little or too much conflict can be dysfunctional. You want the right level where people can be challenged and come up with new ideas. Then there's the subordinate goal of the overall organization. It's more important to the well-being of the organization and its members than the more specific goals of the conflicting parties. And within managing conflict, managers can use structure to manage conflict. They have a managerial hierarchy where managers place one manager in charge of people, groups, and departments, and that particular person's task is to manage the work group, the production, the flow, and the temperament of people. Then there's rules and procedures where the rules and people have, if conflict occurs, you have to use the rules as a template. Routine conflict management can be handled VO rules are basically standard procedures. Then there's the liaison rules, which is a device for managing conflict. It coordinates activities acting as a common point of contact. Then there's a task force, which is somewhat can be used as a third-party agreement, created when the need for conflict management is acute, and when the interdependence is complex, and several groups and individuals are involved. A single liaison person may not be sufficient enough. So therefore, you need a task force. You need more than one person. Then you have managers using interpersonal techniques to manage conflicts, such as team builders, surveys, and third-party peacemaking, as we touched on. A second ago, team builders are basically activities where you go off-site or on-site, and you can engage in certain activities to relieve people, to build camaraderie within work groups. Then there's a survey and feedback, which is anonymous questionnaires that employees or personnel can use to input about work groups, executives, managers, company process and procedures, and they can speak freely about it. Then there's a third-party peacemaking. It's often used when substantial conflict exists within an organization, as I mentioned, interchangeably, third-party peacemaking and task force. Then there's negotiation in organizations. Negotiation is a process in which two or more parties reach agreement on an issue though they have different preferences regarding the issue. Basically, we all understand what negotiation is. We have to compromise at times. There's individual differences and situational characteristics where other things come into play, such as culture and diversity. And you have to give something to gain something by reaching concessions. Then there's the game theory, it was developed by economists using mathematical models to predict the outcomes of negotiation situations. It requires that every alternative and outcome be analyzed with probabilities and numerical outcomes reflecting the preferences to each outcome, along with the cognitive approaches, which is similar in basically prediction, basically predicting and using algorithms to go over every possible outcome of every negotiation. Then finally, there's the win-win situation within negotiations where the opportunity for both sides to be winners. They have to get what they want out of the agreement. The focus of both parties reaching an agreement such that both are committed to fulfilling their own end of the agreement and to returning for more agreements in the future. Within the win-win negotiation, there's the PRAM model, which is the planning, relationships, agreements, and the maintenance. The planning requires that each negotiator set his own goals. So they go into the situation, weighing what they want to get out of the negotiation, as well as what is an acceptable loss. We have to understand what is measurable, what is affordable. We have to answer those questions before we go into the negotiations to understand or how we can enter into or result into a win-win situation. Then there's the relationships. Requires that negotiators plan activities that enable positive personal relationships to develop. You want to be respectful within your negotiations, within your conflict. Then there's the agreement, which requires that each party confirm that the other party goes. So we have one that we have to basically confirm what the other person wants, have to be willing to give concessions. Then there's the maintenance, which we can build for camaraderie, rapport, and future relationships. And the question that I have to explain something about the question. Although there are some who understand and practice emotional intelligence, there are some who result to a primary reaction, which they mainly do at all times. In the majority cases of conflict, an individual that is a strong introvert may result to primarily using avoidance due to their temperament. In another case, a strong extrovert may result in competition in many cases of conflict. My question, are you aware of your primary reaction to conflict? If so, do you know how to manage the other reactions during conflict? Give an example from your personal experience of managing your reaction of conflict. Again, my name is Karl Lampkin. I thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please mention your question in the post in the thread. Once again, thank you. God bless you. You have a good evening.